morning. Welcome to the technical presentation of the monitoring report on territories affected by illicit crops in Colombia corresponding to 2020. My name is Diana Camacho and I'm greeting you from the Ministry of Justice and Law in Bogota. Thank you to all the people who are connected via virtual means. It's July 29th, 2021, 9 o'clock in the morning. We also thank the leadership of the Ministry of Justice and Law, Mr. Wilson Luis Orejuela, and Ministry of Defense, Mr. Diego Mulano Aponte, and the rep of the UNODC in Colombia, Mr. Pierre Lepac. We would like to remind you that we are here in presence to inform you about this complete monitoring of the territories affected by illicit crops. The analysis and numbers that are related to all the municipalities and territories that have coca cultivations. It will begin with the words of the Ministry of Justice and Law, and then we will continue with the rep of the UNODC. After this, we will listen to the presentation of the findings of the report of the coordinator, Illicit Crops Integrated Monitoring System coordinator. Before closing the event, we will have Q&A session for all the people who have sent us via online. And we would like to ask you to follow us on social networks of the Ministry of Justice at MinDefensa and the United Nations Against Drugs and Crime, UNODC, Colombia. For those who would like to attend this event with simultaneous translation in English in the YouTube channel on the UNODC channel in Colombia, under Annual Report Survey of Territories Affected by Illicit Crops 2020. We would like to begin with the words of the Ministry of Justice and Law, Mr. Wilson Luis Orejuela, for the opening. Mr. Minister, we hear you. Good morning to all. Mr. Pierre Lepac, my friends from Colombia and rep of the United Nations Against Drugs and Crime in Colombia, distinguished Mr. Diego Mulano Aponte, my colleague from the Cabinet and the Ministry of National Defense, Ms. Diana Babulsa Milanes, my Vice Ministry of Justice and Criminal Restoration Law. Greetings to Mr. Andrés Peña Andrade, and also Leonardo Correa, coordinator of the CINCI, and delegates of the territory entities and the national entities, representatives of the academia, organizations of the civil society, corporation bodies, communication means, and ladies and gentlemen, we would like to greet you especially. As you know, last July 9th, the Office of the United Nations Against Drugs and Crimes in Colombia presented the main results of the census of the illicit crops beside the President of the Republic, Mr. Ivan Duque Marquez. Today, we have the pleasure to deliver to the country and to the international community the monitoring report of the territories that have been affected by illicit crops in 2020. Those that present broad information, detailed information, and with regional perspectives on the problems of the crops and the related factors. The main relevant result that we have with this report is a confirmation of the interruption of the trends of the increasing trends of the illicit crops. For the third year in the row, we have a sustainable reduction in the area that have been cultivated, that we see the accumulated diminution of 28,000 hectares. That is to say, 17% less of the ones that we have reported in 2017. Again, the diminishing of these illicit crops is an indicator that is very important with the integral policies to confront the problems that we have with drugs. The future route, which are following a more ambitious objective. This is the one of the transformation of the territories and the institution of the illicit economies, or through the rural development and social investment and legal culture. As a proof of this, the government Mr. President of the Republic, Mr. Ivan Duque, had invested more than 900,000 million pesos through the national program of the substitution of illicit crops, the NIL program, that have benefited more than 95,000 families that have taken the decision or made the decision of being in the legal pathway. The studies that have been carried out by the Ministry of Justice and Law will tell you or show proof of the increase of the capabilities of the suspension of the cocaine, and they also point out the increase is leaving behind the increase of the crops of the areas that have been cultivated with coca. This is showing proof of the future routes that have been established, an integral action on all the links of the value of drug trafficking. That's the reason that everything that has to do with the effects of these structures, of criminal structures that are dedicated to drug trafficking, have been highlighted. The valuable action that we have been carrying out, that we've been destroying more than 15,000 infrastructures for the production of illicit crops or drugs, like the seizing of almost more than 25,000 liquid substances and more than 28 tons of solids. These actions have allowed us to protect all the Colombians from all the violence generated by drug trafficking and to preserve the water, the biodiversity, and the environment as main actors of our country. I would like to tell you that only in 2020, the economical affectation to these criminal organizations that are transnational with the actions of our public armed forces, this government have extradited 503 people. Of those, 415 correspond to crimes related to drug trafficking. That's to say that 83% of these extraditions are related to drug trafficking. We are continuing with the commitment and not mistaken to continue implementing an integral policy against the fight for drugs, where the fundamental idea or objective is to protect the population and the transformation of these territories. I would like to thank deeply the CINCI team of the United Nations in Colombia for advancing or progressing year by year, year after year, for all this illicit monitoring in our country, with the use of rigorous methodologies that allows us not to only have the official number of the national government on the planted areas, but also to surround this indicator with associated information that is very useful to show the public policy fundamentals, showing the results of the success of this future routes. We are not happy with this still. On the contrary, we have the conviction to continue working with this without resting so we can stop the drug trafficking in Colombia. This idea is not only comes from the most important thing from our government, but it's also an objective for the Colombian society that wish to have a legalized country without drug trafficking. Drug trafficking is the bad part of humanity. Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for your intervention. We will continue in this event with the presentation of the monitoring report of all the territories affected in 2020 for intervention from France by Mr. Pierre Lapac, the rep of the UNODC against. Good morning. I would like to send a special greetings to the Minister of Justice and Law, Mr. Wilson Ruiz, and all his work team, with the one that we articulate with to make this year report possible, that we are going to show the country elements based on the evidence for the formulation and implementation of public policies of drugs. And we would also like to greet the Ministry of Defense, Mr. Diego Molano, and Mr. Leonardo Correa, as all the other colleagues from the integral system of the illicit crop monitoring, CINCI. Last July 9th, I had the opportunity to speak with Mr. President of the Republic and with all the Colombian people the main findings of the monitoring of the coca crops. We showed two conclusions. The first one was that the hectares that have been planted with coca are in the reduction, but the production of cocaine is increasing. Second of all, is that the trend for the concentration of coca is separating the country in two. On one side, those productive areas where the problem is more complex, and on the other side, the territory sides where the cultivators or growers are finding less incentives to continue in the illicit business. These territories, these settlements that only have 33% of the territory but have 41% of the cocaine, they're the ones who are responsible for the increase of the production or productivity. In this opportunity, we are delivering a complete report that supports all these conclusions. In this document, you will be able to find not only one great level of the disintegration of these actions, but also an analytical framework based and in deep. This report, for example, indicates that 87% of the cocaine is in the areas that have been affected for more than 10 years because of these crops. These zones only have 27% of all the territory that is affected. Also, shows that for every hectare that they have coca in, they can have 7.9 kilograms of hydrochloride of cocaine. Once we have seen what we had in 2003, and which was the year with the lowest number in the history of these plantations. Even though Colombia achieved this in the seizing, the production reached 1,628 tons. Other information that is relevant, that nearly half of this cocaine are in the zones. 15% of this are in the communities, in the black community territories, and 28% are in the indigenous reserves, and 5% is in the national parks in Colombia. Through the report that we are delivering today, we would like to continue showing the commitments that we have to have better technical evidence for the decision making and the policy designing. Colombia is also in a very key moment to reach the future and to show the strategies. The way that we have distributed the coca in the territory, this information is very useful to increase the sustainability of the interventions. The report also highlights that the conditions of this problem has also changed in many ways. For example, the illegal groups that control the business have changed, and these structures of these groups are very different now from those from the past. The incentives from all the illegal groups as from the growers as well are changing. And finally, Colombia is before a very strong territory specialization where an illicit activity as drug trafficking makes it a critical mass to attract crimes as human trafficking, money laundering, because of and corruption. Some days ago, I had the opportunity to show the report of the exploitation of alluvial gold exploitation. 69% of this corresponds to the illicit exploitation or unlawful exploitation. And we look at the maps of the coca and Avoa, we find that 41% of the territory where we have Avoa, we also have coca. Illegality is a very complex phenomenon with many phases that require different strategies to confront them or face them. This week, as well, we also commemorate the World Day Against Human Trafficking, a crime in which, in many occasions, we have the participation of these drug trafficking networks. We have to mention that Those 34% of the cases of human trafficking that have been identified correspond to children, boys, girls, and teenagers. And the cases of exploitation of forceful labor is increasing as well, with victims that are in the immigrant population and indigenous population. The crimes are not happening in an isolated way, they're every day more linked one to the other. This is creating very complex relationships in the territories. In those territories that are vulnerable and isolated, we can see all the manifestations of the unlawfulness as coca and EBOAs. But we also have other links of these territories that require to be seen. The production of drugs in an isolated area depends on the chemical substances that are deviated from the cities, and the money of drug trafficking is being transformed in richness outside of these isolated zones. The course of the capital of this capital goes through size and places that does not silence them. So this is why we need an integral site. 95% of the coca is in the municipalities that are far away. An opportunity that we cannot surpass to put this idea in practice of transforming all these territories as well. Not only taking away those factors of concerning, but also correcting all the vulnerabilities, working with the communities and creating an institutionality that is strong and centered in creating conditions for the development of security and peace. And UNODC will cover with other Colombian institutions, each one of these with some experience in those topics of their mission. This has allowed us to have a very broad view and an articulated view on all the unlawful issues that affect the country. For this reason, we can say that Colombia counts with the human talent that is required to understand this phenomenon better and to act against it. I am sure that this report will be very useful to evidence all the dynamics of the coca, but as well to stimulate all the technical competencies and the capabilities of innovation that would allow us to confront these actions and that will make this more make all these large or greater efforts valuable.
We thank the representative of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. I'm here accompanied here in the set by the coordinator of the Integrated System for the Monitoring of Illegal Crops of the United Nations, UNODC. So, Mr. Leonardo Correa, many thanks for your presence and for the presentation you are going to give us. Special greetings also for the colleagues that are listening to us through the platforms. Now, what I'm going to do now is a quick overview over the main findings of this report, Colombia Monitoring Report of Territories Affected by Illegal Crops as of December 2020. Let's remember that we have launched many of the main figures, a trend to the reduction, and by 7% we reached 143,000 hectares planted with coca, a reduction trend that started in 2017. And what I would like to do now is to work a little bit and tell you where are those 143,000 hectares. And for that, the policy of future route offers us a framework that allows us to understand better where the coca is. 48% of the coca is in special management zones, and this includes national parks, community councils, and zones that are forest reserves. That is, almost 0.5% of the coca are in zones that require some specific strategy that is part of the norms for the intervention. 34% is located in zones that future route are called strategic interest zones. And these zones, I would like to highlight the dampening zone, especially those of Catatumbo, Bari Natural Park, and Patatu Bari. And I'm saying that because the growth of coca in these zones constitutes a threat for the biodiversity of the country. A third category that policy call is zones of free intervention. So in these zones, we have 18% of the coca that exists in the country. And we cast a glance over the zones, we see that four departments concentrate over 70% of the coca. Among them, Nariño, north of Santander, Putumayo, and Cauca. In those four departments or provinces, 70% of coca exists, where means that other departments that are in the other end. We have 8 departments where there are less than 100,000 hectares planted with coca, and a sub-region, the Middle Magdalena River Valley. The Ministry of Justice and Law is carrying out a project right now to consolidate that as a territory free of coca. So it's very important to say that while the extension of the land planted with coca in those first departments are between 1.3 hectares each, in these other departments is less than 0.5 hectares. But maybe one of the most important findings of this report is that even though we have this reduction in the number of hectares planted with coca, the production of cocaine continue to increase. In the graph, you may see in green color the historical series of hectares planted with coca, and in red, the production of cocaine. And it's important to say that even though we are completing 3 years with less hectares planted with coca, the production of cocaine is going up. And this is happening because, generally speaking, the production of cocaine depends from 4 factors. The first one, the area planted with coca. This number 2, then the alkaloid available. The third, the capacity to extract the alkaloid from leaves. And the fourth, the capacity to transform the coca paste and base, to transform that into hydrochloride cocaine. So what is happening in Colombia right now, that even though factor number 1, the area planted with coca, is diminishing, the other 3 factors are increasing. And they're increasing among other reasons because of, first, we have found that optimum density and the right conditions of soils and sunlight for that. In 2005, 11,000 plants were planted per hectare. Now we have less hectares, but there is an optimum benefiting of nutrients, of sunlight, meaning that even though we have perhaps less plants, overall, there are more leaves available and more concentration of plants per hectare. The second element is that most landlots are in the maximum productivity ages, that is between 2 and 4 years. Whereas in 2005, 40% of landlots were in between 4 years of age. In this report, we are going to find that 65% of landlots are in the maximum productivity age. And an additional factor, perhaps, is that the landlots were renewed. That is, those that are in maximum productivity stage don't have the same conditions, let's say, that existed in 2005. At that time, we talk about the sweet variety, the Bongo Maria, the Peruvian variety. Now we have another species that have greater production capability and, above all, more capacity to concentrate the alkaloid in the leaves. In addition to that, we have found that many labs stopped being, let's say, medium size and large and dispersed, scattered, to become mega labs that are concentrated in special zones. And that joint action means that, as you can see in the graph in blue, means that both the yield per hectare, that is the amount of leaves produced per hectare, is going up, and at the same time the amount of hydrochloride cocaine that can be extracted from a hectare is going up, and that is represented in the 2 graphs that are in blue. Whereas in 2006, where this trend started, the increase in productivity in 2006, 5.6 metric tons per leaf, now we are seeing almost a 40% increase in the capacity to produce the leaf. And there's also an increase, this time 22%, in the capacity to produce hydrochloride cocaine. But I also want to highlight that this situation doesn't happen in the rest of the country. It is strongly concentrated in some territories that we have called key territories, productive territories, zones where their cultivations are very close one to the other, but that same situation has remained in place for over 4 years. And when these two conditions converge, then we can call it is an enclave. And we are seeing this year two new enclaves, one in the south of Bolivar and a second one in Putumayo. And that situation of productive enclaves means, let's say that it's special, because as I said in the first place, and we heard before in the speech, they occupy only 14% of territory, but they gather, let's say, 40% of the coca leaves that exist. And you can see in this slide right now several KPIs of three productive enclaves, El Tambo, El Catatumbo, and the productive enclave of Tarasa. And we add those three, where we are going to find is that we have 9% of the territory only, but only in those three enclaves we have 30% of cocaine production. So, look, the Argelia Tambo enclave produced 12 metric tons of cocaine per hectare, whereas the national average is about 6. And that same enclave has the capacity to produce almost 15 kilograms of pure cocaine per year, and the national average is 7.9 kilograms of cocaine per year. So that situation that enclaves are increasing visibly, the capacity to produce cocaine is the one that is propelling the fact that in those enclaves we have a very complex situation and conditions. Allow me to speak of some of them. In some of these enclaves there are population settlements, and we are seeing that 26% of the entire coca that exists in the country is tied or close to the 10 urban centers of settlements, and they have been developing conditions and the market's interactions in the institutional presence that is pretty complex. And you may see there the settlements of urban enclaves. They are part of these enclaves, and in those places we have not only the illegal crops, but the entire production of cocaine, the trade, the traffic, and everything that is required for the coca leaf that is planted there can be transformed into cocaine, and then it's transformed into money. So let's look, for instance, in those enclaves. If we add the three of them, the market, it's 77 million dollars that it's only concentrated in those three little villages like Gabarra, El Mango, El Plateado, names that are very small villages that are receiving huge amounts of money. Argelia El Tambo, for instance, due to the production of coca leaves, they produced $73 million. So that is 18% of the entire money that is produced by the trade of coca leaves in the entire country. And we turn that into hydrochloride cocaine. We are speaking about $536 million that are moving only in those three small enclaves. And I want to emphasize on that. I'm speaking about little territories. Only 16% of the let's say, territories that deal with cocaine in Colombia. So we have over 30% of the entire money produced. And that situation of enclaves, we can see it in this slide, and this is our permanent map. Red is showing me the areas that for over 10 years have illegal crops. And there we have 84% of the entire coca produced in the country. Now in green, we have areas where there was coca at some point in time, and in the last 3 years we haven't seen any, and the Ministry of Justice and Law is managing to consolidate those territories as territories free of coca. So that same situation means that the change is have special conditions, and I'm speaking about the conditions for those areas of special interest. The coca and parks increased, but it went down in the native communities and the Afro-American community, but they continue to be of special interest and very much affected. 15% of the entire coca are in this Afro-Colombian communities, and they also the rest and the national parks and native communities. And this national parks is very important because just 1 hectare that is affecting this national park constitute a huge risk for the preservation of biodiversity of that same park. So, future route policy offers tools and strategies and analyses that are quite wonderful. I want to show you in this graph what is more on the left and correspond to zones where there is a greater reduction, and what is on more above it correspond to zones where there is more intervention. So see, let's look intervention in those areas of productive integration and affected permanently have seen a special reduction in those areas, but a high level of intervention that also took place in forest zones did not generate such an important reduction. Look that in those areas where there was no intervention, the situation is relative stability, and this is important because it makes a call of attention to us to how important it is to design the proper intervention action as from the specific conditions of the territory. These strategies for intervention are the same, but they have worked much better in those areas that we call the productive integration than in others. I'm going quickly over the intervention aspects because I think it's important for us to understand that our intervention strategies and intervention really, I'm speaking of manual eradication by public forces, armed forces. In those territories where they were subject to those interventions, we saw a reduction of 14%, double of reduction that we are reporting for the entire country. But that same intervention only, let's say, reached 35% in 2020. Only 35% of the entire territory, 55% of the territory did not register or was subject to intervention. And I want to highlight here something. 14% of the territory intervened was free of coca. Real free, without a single hectare planted with coca, nor in that place or in the surrounding area. And this is important because we, or let's say for us, it's not sufficient a strategy to reduce coca, but it's also important to find another strategy or a blend of strategies actually that takes the coca of the entire territory. Right now, you are seeing there the estimates we are doing of replanting in 1 point, the amount of hectares that at the end of the year keep coca plantation, notwithstanding it was intervened. 38% of the hectares intervened at the end of the year maintain coca cultivations. And I want to highlight from this chart specifically that after that year, only 8% of the entire interventions really managed to consolidate territories free of coca. Not only inside the polygon intervene, but in the surrounding area. And this, of course, is quite important. Not only must we assess the replanting as the amount of coca that exists in the polygon intervene, but the effect it has over the surrounding areas. And in this, we still have a huge job to do. But here we also observe that from the entire territory where there was reduction, 38% was subject to intervention, only 38%. 62% of the territory there was reduction, but no intervention, as I said before. I mean, in terms of manual eradication or else. So what this means that 62% of the territories, there is another factor that is motivating their reduction. There are other factors that have motivated reduction, other actions. It could be security, it could be the strengthening of access to justice, ministries working hard on this, it could be actions related to alternatives to the legal crops, I mean for the farmer, for the peasant. And this fact that we have other actions available different from, let's say, manual eradication on part of armed forces or public institutions that complement these efforts. So make us think, remind us that incentives to remain in coca are there, and they're especially strong in those territories that I call enclaves. And I want to talk about some figures of the size of the market. When we are talking about the size, or in other words, how much is worth the coca, the production of coca leaves, it is around $520 million. And that turned into cocaine and plays at ports amount to 1.5 and 2 billion dollars. What I'm saying with this, what I'm trying to say with this is, yes, of course, a big part of the problem of the market is associated to coca crops. But when we see this in terms of cocaine production, there are new stakeholders in that, and it's important to understand that this business. Many more people are participating than just the simple farmers or peasants that are cultivating the coca. And that in the upper right hand side, we are mentioning some of the actors or stakeholders that are involved here. And what I want to highlight from this is that in the productive enclaves that I mentioned before, these stakeholders are all in the same territory. That is, that we have many of them spread around, but in productive enclaves, all of them are acting in those territories, the enclave territories. What this means? It means that hand labor associated to the processing and the plantation of coca leaves amount to $44 million. So most of this $44 million let's say, are produced in those little territories, means that many more persons, not only the cultivator, the farmer, is dependent from the revenue of the coca plantation. We think in consumables and other substances and services, let's say, require for not the coca leaf, but they transform themselves that into cocaine. So we are talking about $870 million. It means that not only the farmer, but the ones that transport the chemical substance, that store, that sells the nutrients and fertilizers, that store, that sends the machinery, and other persons that are involved in transporting those into the land lot and then taking it out. So not only do we have many more stakeholders involved, but the fact that we have enclaves means that all those stakeholders are living in the same territory and acting there. And that is generating very complex relationships that oblige us to take in comprehensive actions. The minister mentioned that very well. It's not sufficient to eradicate the plants. We need to reach those territories with improvements in justice, with a reduction in corruption, with many more tools, let's say, so that people can develop their own capabilities fully. And I want to end this presentation by reminding you that this is not a problem that is only in Colombia, lies only Colombia, but it's something that is global. 20 million consumers, and I'm using figures of 2019 because they are the latest ones. Globally speaking, in Colombia, we have an update of this for a country in 2020, but globally. The World Report on Drugs reminds us that there are 20 million consumers of cocaine around the world. In Colombia alone, we have reports of 136,000 in the last year. But all that production of Colombia really is going out abroad to international markets to satisfy the demands of the 20 million consumers. If we go and estimate the value of cocaine that is leaving Colombia, and let's say in the first port of call abroad after leaving Colombia, that the size of the market that in Colombia would be, let's say, of $1.3 billion is becoming in $10 billion once it reached the port of call, the first port of call. And there are many incentives in this market, globally speaking, that continue affecting and putting at risk the overall situation of Colombia. And that's why it's not sufficient to eliminate the coca plantations from different territories across the country, but we need to find strategies, support the big effort that the public armed forces are doing in our country, making sure that their actions are sustainable. Removing the coca, yes, we are something positive to achieve the development, to achieve the peace, and of course to achieve equality among all. So many thanks for your attention. Many thanks, Mr. Correa. I remind you, all of you that are here with us virtually in this event, this presentation of monitoring report of territories affected by illegal crops 2012, that you can follow this through the social media of the Ministry of Justice and Law, minjusticia.com and mindefensa.com, and you at ODC at yeah. We're going to have a session of Q&A where we will have the participation of Mr. Nato Correa, coordinator of the Integrated System for Monitoring Illegal Crops of United Nations Office on Drug and Crime. But I want to leave you with Diego Molano, the Minister of Defense, that is will address you. Greetings to Mr. Minister of Justice and Law, to Mr. Pierre Lapac from the United Nations Office on Crimes and Drugs, to the Vice Minister, directors, and all guests that are part of this presentation of a report, monitoring report on territory affected by illegal crops. And thanks to the leadership of President Duque with an comprehensive policy to counteract this problem, for the third consecutive year, Colombia has achieved a reduction in territories affected by illegal crops, mainly coca. 2020 was really difficult. We are confronting pandemics like COVID, to adverse climate conditions, and other maneuvers of drug traffickers and illegal armed factions such as ELN and FARC dissidents and Clan del Golfo, seeking to limit the actions of our public forces. In fact, over 1,862 blockages took place with violent actions against the soldiers and policemen that were involved in eradication. 22 attacks to operating camps that were doing manual eradication, and over 148 improvised explosives were deactivated, located in order to attack the farmers and attack the eradicators. So we have evidence that illegal armed factions resort to anti-personnel mines and also to sharpshooters, and many members of our armed forces and 12 farmers were assassinated, and we are paying homage to them and special greetings to the families. Likewise, 85 members of the armed forces and 22 eradicators were injured as a result of these terrorist attacks. Notwithstanding all these attacks and challenges posed by the criminals, and especially by the pandemics, the armed forces have continued without stopping, strengthening their capability to do manual eradication. Make of this one of the largest operations, with over 3,000 men involved in eradication and in protecting duties. And in that year, we eradicated 130,000 hectares of illegal crops, representing a free in an area of 120,000 football pitches, or 34 times the size of the Medellin city. The hectares eradicated during that year generated an economic blow for illegal finances of these illegal groups, $1.3 billion, and 100,000 kilograms of cocaine were not produced, thanks to the work of members of armed forces. Precisely, that work leave us with a staggered figures and cocaine impounded. Between the 1st of January and 31st December, we impounded over 535 tons of chlorhydrochloric cocaine, 80% more than in 2019, amounting to $16.6 billion in U.S. market values. And of course, reduction over 1,000 million doses, personal doses, saving lives of young people in national and international markets that will be affected by this consumption. Likewise, we impounded 63 tons of coca base, over 546 tons of coca leaves, 535 tons of marijuana, and 5,236 facilities infrastructure, meaning labs, for the production of illegal drugs. Of course, a blow for the productivity of this business. As this report shows, it represents a reduction of 7% in the total hectares planted. Worth saying that these are in areas where there was the highest presence of mobile groups for eradication, meaning the departments of Caquetá, Nariño, Putumayo. However, we need to remember other works that are being carried out in Catatumbo, for instance, where the concentration of crops were not going down since 2016. So throughout this year, in 2021, really, the public forces is carrying out an infatigable job. Men, armed forces, and police committed to reach that goal of 130,000 hectares eradicated by the end of the year. As part of the strengthening of this operation, we managed to achieve a capacity of 130 teams, 114 PECAT, actually the ones that were the guides of this, and 138,000 hectares we eradicated, 546 tons of hydrochloride cocaine were impounded, as well as 62% more of coca leaves impounded in respect to previous year. Over 8 million gallons of solid consumables, 47,000 tons of these were impounded, and over 1,000 facilities infrastructure were destroyed. 14% more in respect to 2019. The diminishing of the capacities, especially the suspension of air spraying and the mobile eradication teams, means that we saw an increase in 2015 and illegal crops. However, due to the policy of President Duque from the very first year of his terms in office, first we managed to stabilize that, stopping the growth, and now showing reductions, one after the other, accumulated 7% reduction in the total hectares. So, a triumph of the policy to counter the illegal crops, part of President Duque. So we will continue fighting this year, fighting the entire drug trafficking chain, setting a goal for ourselves and managing the reduction of the overall area planted with coca. And not only impounding, of course, but diminish the productivity. And that is the big goal here. Diminish productivity to diminish the source of violence, to diminish drug trafficking, the main originator of violence in Colombia. Production and illegal use that generate death and the killings of social leaders and other people around the country, not to mention the contamination of water sources, the destruction of rainforests. So many thanks, Minister.
For the Ministry of Justice and Law, and also for the Illicit Crop Integrated Monitoring System from the United Nations Office Against Drugs and Crime, for participating in this event. Now, for you three, I will be asking you questions that are being carried out by some of the communication means. I will begin with the first question that is directed or for the Ministry of Defense. Mr. Juan Diego Ponce from Inside Crime asks this. The central region of Antioquia, Chocó, Córdoba, and Bolívar had an increase in coca crops of 24%. New production sites or corridors, as in Sao Paulo, Tarauqué, Bolívar, continue being of special attention for criminal groups. What factors are increasing these crops in Bolívar, and what actors are involved in this? The zone of Surulio has the same situation as the Department of Cauca. We had a greater or major intervention from the public side. Of course, we have had a corridor come up that is seeking a dispute as a fundamental corridor for drug trafficking among ELN and the dissidencies of FARC and Clan del Golfo. Now we have special activities carried out by eradication for this year in this zone, which will allows us to have reduction of these crops in these sites that have incurred in this part of the South of Bolivia. And it's also key that there's a high interest of ELNs that's coming down from the Cotatumbo, passing through El Cesar and going towards the south of Cordoba to control this corridor, which we will not allow. And the important zones that we must highlight or point out to is not only in this area, but in the national level, they're reporting most of the times these illegal armed groups, the presence of these groups is seeking and creating territorial disputes for the control of this business and crops, in some cases of illegal mining. This is the reason for why every day we are confirming our commitment and without any truce in this against these criminal groups that are very harmful for our country. Thank you very much, Minister. The following question is directed for the Minister of Justice and Law. Ana Maria Cuesta from CMI asks us, what is happening with the municipalities, P, or the ones that are in the peace treaty, where we have 95% of the illicit crops, and why is the state investment in these zones have not achieved a real impact? This has to do with the resources of the drug trafficking that is double as much as the one from the states in these zones. Thank you very much, Ana Maria. We cannot deny that the capability of the money to create corruption, production of this illegal activity is giving us a high influence. And of course, I would like to tell you that with this, there's appearance that is being exercised by these armed groups, illegal armed groups, without any considerations for the welfare, well-being, or integration of these communities. This situation, of course, will difficult all the consolidation of the state offer. Mr. Minister, thank you very much. Now we have a question precisely for the coordinator of the illicit crops from the UNODC, Mr. Sebastian Perea from the Espectador newspaper. Well, we registered the fight against coca with the numbers that are registered against the production and plantation. Now, Mr. President Ivan Duque is legalizing this, the production of the flour. Do you think they should do this for the derives of this? Yes, thank you very much for the question. The first thing I would like to mention is that we cannot think of drugs as if they were all the same. Each one of these have particularities or different features, and especially the cannabis. In the cannabis side, we must remember that, or remind ourselves that there's a scientific investigation or research. We have a normative or standards framework, and we also have an international framework that have made this progress possible in behalf of the government of Colombia. In the side of the coca, we're just beginning to know a lot of the details that are necessary to have this discussion in an international level. But beyond this, I would like to highlight that the problem or the reason why we do not have the coca, let's say why we still are in this concern phase in regards to the production of coca, is because it's articulated in these territories. We can solve the coca problem, but the problem with the territories is going to continue. We do not work in improving the institutions, improving the competitiveness of the communities, creating conditions for the development of these territories. Thank you very much. And the following question is being carried out by Diego Legrand from the French press agency, and is for the Ministry of Defense. What is the balance of the forceful legality, and why does it continue to be almost the same of the hectares that have been planted in this zone? In Cauca, as in the other zones in the country, are diverse sites with different factors that create violence. The dynamics of this violence implies some previous measures that must be given for the operation of these eradication activities. This also implies for our public force, which has more intensity or less intensity in the rest of the territory. And this is the reason why we're doing this with the illegal crops. We will not allow these illegal groups to continue with these dynamics of crime. The Central Zone, Choco, Cordoba, and Bolivar had an increase of the crops of almost 24% because of the new sites or corridors in the zones like Sao Paulo and Bolivar. They continue to be of special attention for these criminal groups to use them as drug trafficking corridors, and the disputes that exist among the dissidents of FARC and ELN that are being seen in Cauca department. We will continue to we break these groups up that are carrying out these drug trafficking activities that are affecting the tranquility and the peace of all the Caucanos. Thank you very much, Minister. We will continue with the question for the coordinator of the illicit crop integrated monitoring system, UNODC, Ms. Maria Cuesta from. This is it. They report that 62% of these sites that have crops, we've seen a reduction without any intervention from the state. If we do not have this, what explanations do we have to reduce these crops in this way? Well, thank you very much. Since December 31, 2017, we were in the highest point of this cultivation. Then we started a reduction. In 2018, we had some stability, and then after 2018, we started reporting everything in 2019, and now in 2020, we have reported reduction. What we have seen is that this reduction is not only related with the intervention in behalf of the public force and by the substitutions, but we also have other factors that are also important. We do not have any records of these actions, and this is the reason why we would like to recap on the importance of the intervention beyond the great efforts that we're carrying out right now with eradication. In 62% of the territory, as it was mentioned by the news reporter, we have the trend of reduction without, well, having in this year any interventions of eradication. But it is possible that in the prior years we had intervention with eradication. The calling here is for the society. The interventions that are being carried out by the public force, the substitutions, require a complementary exercise that will end up consolidating and creating conditions for the competitiveness, for the improvement of the institutional presence, and for peace and development in these territories. Thank you very much. Now we will go with the question for the Ministry of Justice and Law, Diego Repress from France. What have happened with the return of these sprayings with the glyphosate? Can we expect these to come back this year? Yes. Thank you very much to Diana and Diego Legrand for the questions that you have just asked. That the Honorable Constitutional Court ruled the sentence from 2017, and of course, they defined the requirements to continue the eradication of these illicit crops used in this modality. In this sense, the national government has been working with this to comply all the considerations that have been exposed by the Honorable Constitutional Court, not only in the minimum characteristics framework, but we are also seeking for the activity based on the scientific advances that we have in agriculture and the military positions, of course, that offer security for those communities that are in these areas that we're going to intervene. As for the environment, in this sense, the national government has written a decree 380 from April 21 that looks to regulate all the risk control of all the risks for the humans and environment through these methods of the spraying, having all the previous interventions, the responsibilities of the process, and of course the assessment and constant revision. In this case, we must clarify that the distance to analyze the total of these requirements that we must comply with and decide on if we can continue with the spraying activities is through the following question. Minister to the Minister of Defense, Diana Carolina from the National Radio of Colombia is asking how many seizures of cocaine and substances have been carried out from 2020 to date. As it was mentioned priorly, in 2020 we had important outcomes against the fight against drug trafficking. In intervention matters from 2020 and 2021, we have seized more than 880 tons of cocaine, hydrochloride, more than 20 tons of cocaine base, and more than 1,080 tons of cocaine leaves, and more than 220 tons of cocaine, and more than 16,000 gallons of supplies, liquid supplies, and solid ones as well. We have interrupted and destroyed 257 laboratories for the production of illicit drugs in Colombia. In regards to the groups that are armed and organized in one way or another are operating in the zones, we are fighting this criminal activities is our priority, is our purpose in the public and security policies in our country. The fight we have with these groups is a priority with the country. Is not, we're not only the exporters of drugs. Now through these groups, especially like Clan del Golfo, we have franchises and alliances or relationships to do this, and also to create micro trafficking in some zones, and that create crime and destroy our peace in some places of the country. Now we have one last question that we would like to give space to. It's from the periódico El Tiempo, Mr. Orlando Correa. This presentation of the complete studies confirms what was presented some months ago of a new year with a reduction of planted hectares of coca. But since it's always been different, the measuring of this year in the same way that the White House does is different, but it's on the contrary of the SIMSI. Now we have a record planting of coca. Why is UNODC reaching these different conclusions and that are so contrary to the ones from the White House? Thank you very much. The first thing I would like to say is that the more information that we have on this phenomenon is even better. And there are different ways of measuring these phenomena. The fact that we have different data doesn't mean that there are contradictions, but I would like to detain myself here a little bit. We can have different measurements in several ways. The first one, what do we consider a lot of coca? For some people, a lot of coca can be naked or bare ground that only have seeds, and this will only become a lot of coca when these seeds are flourishing. And a lot of coca for some people can be a place where they only have 3 plants in a hectare, and for some other ones where they really need to have productive or a lot of production of coca. From these same things, we can have different ideas. There's another important factor, is when is this measurement given? In the methodology of the United Nations, we only have one measurement, one photography, and this photography is obtained on December 31st of the year that we're reporting. So it will also be possible not to make this photograph, but to take or create a video of everything that we have done throughout the year. In this case, we'll be identifying the coca lots that were eradicated. They will be in the video, but they will not be in the photography because they were eradicated. What I would like to say with this is that it is very important to have a complete knowledge of what we're living, and not necessarily to have having different data will imply contradictions. What we have observed is that there is an important increase after 2017. There's an important increase in the operations of eradication, and this could be directed that when we're seeing the picture at the end of the year, we have a least amounts of coca, but then when we see the picture throughout the year, we're going to have a greater amounts of coca. It's very important to go in deep with this methodological scopes that I do not count with enough information with these scopes from the United States methodology, but it's very important to know that when we have a lot of information on this phenomenon is even better, and we will be able to design better strategies, and we will be able to do better or more efficient public policy. Thank you very much, Mr. Leonardo, for answering these questions to the communication means, and thank you to the Ministry of Defense and Justice and Law for leading and participating in this monitoring of territories that have been affected by the illicit crops corresponding to 2020. I would like to thank all the people who were connected to this broadcast and that followed the event on social networks. The complete document and extra information material and all this that you have just seen is in the observatory website of Droga Colombia, www.odc.gov.co, and the website of the United Nations against on drugs and crime. And also, we would like to invite you that you can visit www.bncinsic.org, where you find more information and a complete photography on this. Thank you very much.